you're new here, my name is Rebecca. I teach a bunch of ACT and SAT prep. Hey, if you're new here, my name is Rebecca. I teach lots of ACT and SAT prep. And today's video is going to be going over a really tricky ACT English grammar rule. I'm going to go over it from a high level, and then we're going to break into some real ACT examples. So hopefully you can score better on test day. And if you like this type of content, please go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you around. Okay, so let's get into this hard ACT English topic, which the more fancy way to say it is going to be your essential and non-essential, essential and non-essential clause, which is a high level to say of like what is actually important. Most people don't really like recognize this term, or they're not like, I don't know, you're not super like comfortable with it, but how this tends to appear on the test that messes up most students is going to look like the parentheses, the two dashes, and the two commas. And all of these from a high level are fairly universal. What you need to know is that all of these in general, for at least in the ACT purposes, are going to reflect non-essential information. And so all that being said, what non-essential means from a high level is you can take it out of the sentence and it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. And so the question would be right, and we'll model this in a minute, on the ACT is if the stuff between the two commas, the two dashes, the two parentheses is non-essential and is not like a big part of the sentence. That is a high level. I will say I've never seen them really test between if you needed parentheses, two dashes, or two commas. If it has a non-essential, and like one of these, you're going to have to just choose one of them. You're not going to have to like decide between all these. So don't over stress about that. So there's one other thing that comes up, and this is like the word that used to drive me crazy. So there's this really dumb word. And I'm sorry if you're an English person. I'm much more of a math person, but I've learned to really like the ACT English section because I found it's actually one of the easiest ones to increase. So the word that drives me crazy on the ACT English, I have two of them, but this main one we're going to cover today is going to be which. Which, as I'm saying this, you're probably thinking like, why does that even matter? Maybe you don't. So which normally is your big signal that it's going to be a non-essential clause, and that will come into practice later. One big red flag to look out for in the ACT, and this is your freebie, and you'll see it in practice. So if you don't know this already, semicolons, and I know mine look like a J, but a semicolon, are the same thing as a period in the eyes of the ACT in general. So what that means is like, if you're going to use a semicolon, then you're not going to use the word which. So from a high level, what you need to know is that which does not go with semicolons. That seems really like particular, but it comes, I don't know, with ACT English, it's just like super helpful to be able to know these like little tiny hacks, and they really do add up, which is why I've been able to increase like so many scores from this, which is awesome. Okay, so that's your high level. The next thing we're going to go into is going to be a little bit of practice. So on the practice, this is going to be from Erica Meltzer's 5th edition. I really like her ACT English work, and I'm about to try out her reading as well. But she goes from a high level, just really practicing each of these different skill sets, and it just really focuses on it. So this is from there. We're going to chat about a couple of these questions. So how they've set this up is slightly different than the ACT English, but still really usable. So on page 59 of this book, the way this is grouped is this paragraph goes with this one, and I'm going to change down the thickness, and then it's so on and so forth from there. So on this particular skill set, and we'll make sure my floating name is moved away for a second, is you are having to decide what's the best use of however. So on this paragraph, it says a tandem is a form of bicycle designed to be ridden by more than one person. The term tandem, however, refers to the seating arrangement front to back, not the number of riders. So here is your hacky way of how you do these. So you can memorize grammar rules to the cows come home, but if you can't apply it, it's just really not going to be helpful at all. With this one right here on number 1, the way I would tackle this on test day is pretty much process of elimination, and this helps so many students. So if you look at D, that's actually normally going to be your easiest one to eliminate, is going to be that dash. So there is single dashes, and we can get into some examples of that like in a little bit, but a lot of times when they are just throwing in a single dash and you've got a transition word, it's not always going to be the correct answer. The way I would check this first is I would look at this whole sentence right here, and I would see if there's any dashes. Now, there is exceptions for what I'm saying, but I'm going to highlight this in a second. So the term tandem, however, refers to the seating arrangement front to back. So if we put a dash in here, which a single dash, the best way to like from a simple term is to just like explain it as an explainer, or I joke it's an ADHD moment, and I'm not picking on people with ADHD, I have it myself. So the term tandem, however, dash, you typically wouldn't put it that far up in the sentence. Yes, there's a little bit of an explainer here, but that's not the main focus. So we would eliminate D. I'm going to get more into how you can also eliminate this. So as you're looking in the sentence, what's really standing out here is, well, we eliminated D, is going to be a comma right here. And then I've got a comma right here. So if we are going to test A and focus on our grammar rules about 2 commas is non-essential information, which pretty much mean you can pull it out and it doesn't mean or change the meaning of the sentence, we're going to practice scratching through that. So whenever you see 2 commas, you test it by just scratching through. And it's really nice, by the way, if you can take a paper test. So the term tandem, not the number of riders. So on number 1, I cannot just keep those 2 commas because the stuff between it is essential, which is proving that A is going to be wrong. You want to get in the mindset with ACT English that you are like checking things and you're truth checking, because it's way easier than just trying to like, okay, what grammar rule does this go to? Instead, you're going to like see if it works and test it. And that's kind of how you test that one. Now we are down to 2. So one option here is going to be tandem, however, and what's really sneaky on B is they have a comma right there. And you're probably thrown off a little bit by the parentheses, but those 2 comma rules still say the same. So we're going to eliminate that. And we're going to read it and to see if however is not essential. So the term tandem refers to the seating arrangement front to back, not to the number of riders, which on a side note, they love on the ACT to do commas around the word however. And a lot of the times when they do, it's actually correct. So on this one here, and I'll go into some others in just a second, is B is going to be the correct answer. This right here is just adding another like additional amount of information. So we're actually going to ignore that comma. But the main focus is that however is your non-essential clause, and you can cross it out. So the answer is going to be B. Now, you're probably thinking like, well, why isn't it C? You've got that comma down there. So if we just lightly test it, and you're really focused on the first comma there. So tandem, however, so I still have that in there from front to back. So if we did C, that would actually scratch through here. It would be the term tandem, however, not the number of riders, which would be really, really confusing. So that's why the answer is going to be B. I thought that one was a little bit harder than some of the others. So let me show you some easy ones, especially if you're feeling a little frustrated. So on number 1, paragraph 2. So what it's talking about is you've got like the Wizard of Oz, but the context doesn't actually matter. So what I'm going directly to is the answers, and I'm seeing what they're checking. And I have a preference of checking the dashes first. So here is my big little hack is if you're testing for dashes and you skim the sentence and the whole sentence and you see that there's already a dash in the sentence, I can bet big money that it's going to be a second dash, and the dash is going to be that answer, which is correct, but we'll test it real quick. So if we wrote a dash in for C, Put a little dash right there. And then we scratch through the stuff between the two dashes. The who is best known. Then we read it. Frank actually wrote 13 novels based on the Land of Oz. And that works beautifully. So that would be correct. But most of the time, we know we don't have a ton of time on the ACT English. If I am seeing two dashes and that's the answer, a lot of the time, like that's just going to be the answer. And I will just move on, to be honest. Okay, so this number 2 right here. The other novels in Oz series, in contrast, did not achieve the same degree of popularity. So we've got a few things to test on number 2. So I try to test, like I said, stronger punctuation. And for me, I'm seeing a semicolon. And just a reminder, a semicolon in the eyes of the ACT is going to equal a period. And so if we cannot put a period there, we cannot put a semicolon there. So let's test it. So I like to draw in here, especially if I'm learning, because it's helpful to slow down before you speed up. So let's pretend we're going to put a little semicolon here. So in the other novels in the Oz series, we can't put a period there. Like, I feel like I want to add more information. So we're going to go ahead and eliminate G. And then the other novels in the Oz series, dash in contrast. So let's look at H. So the other novels in the series, dash. And then we have a comma right here. So a lot of the times you're not going to see a dash and a comma grouped together. It's pretty, you can comfortably actually just eliminate that one because that just doesn't match. Okay, and then on J, the other novels in the Oz series in contrast did not achieve. So you can have singular commas. It's normally going to be an introductory clause when there's just like one comma. And what you would look for is you want to find the subject after there. But it doesn't really have the subject right there. So eliminate J. But here is my big freebie. You see how we have like a transition word right here? And I was talking about however, and there's two commas around it. They really, really love that on the ACT. So if you had to hustle and guess or guesstimate and move on, you can comfortably circle F. It doesn't mean that every single time there is two commas around the transition word on the ACT, it's going to be right. No, but it's good, like a little trick to keep in your back pocket. Okay, so what we're going to do is a couple more of these, and then we'll go on to the ACT English questions because I do get a lot of questions about this. Okay, so this number 1 right here, which choice makes the sentence the most grammatically acceptable? So you've got a lot going on in this situation. So from a high level is we have a parentheses, we have a comma, and my first gut reaction is, oh my Lord, why did they not close that dang parentheses? So the red belt, one of the several color belts used in martial arts level, and I don't have to really think that much more on this one because I need to close the parentheses. Most of you guys do know that. You can't just leave it hanging. And then on a side note, as you read it, that information is non-essential. It's not helpful. So the answer on number 1 is going to be B. And then number 2 is on this one, we're looking at what they're testing. So belts, which is used in karate, well, we get the gist there. So on this one here is where I was hinting about the word which, or one of the hints. I am not an English teacher, so I cannot guarantee every single time. But most of the time, if not all the time, you should not be starting your sentences with the word which. And which is not friends with semicolons. You can use it a little bit around a period. I've seen some exceptions, but on this test, you can just eliminate it by a period. So on number 2, just go ahead and eliminate that one. And then at least you've got one less. And then as you're looking for this, like more commonly known black belt, which is used in karate, the red belt can indicate. So how we want to test this is I see 2 commas right here. So let's see if it's non-essential. So I'm going to cross through this. Like the more commonly known black belt, the red belt can indicate grand master status, blah, blah, blah. That reads so well with the 2 commas. I'm actually not going to test the rest of this. And the answer is F, by the way. One thing to look about, you're like, well, why is it not J? And the way you would read J is if you put this many commas in there, you got to think about taking the breath. You're like, belt, which is used in karate. Like, that's excessive. So you really just don't want to do that. And then our last one with this Erica Meltzer book, and I'm going to link it below too because it's really worth it. On number 3 is we've got a couple of things going on for number 3. So this is where we get to decide, and this is where we put a little bit of a pressure point on the commas and transition words. This is where it does not work. And like I said, a lot of times the ACT leans toward this, but this is really going to be an exception. So this is why you have to test your grammar rules. And this would be like, these ones are easy to mid-level, and this is going to be like your hard level where you really get into testing. So if I'm reading the ACT closely, this is how I would test it. So rule of thumb, strong punctuation first. Semicolon, we talked about semicolon equals a period. Let me scroll down so you can see my writing. So let's go ahead and draw a period in there for D. So, however, so if we read this on the left side, like the more commonly known black belt, which is used in karate, the red belt can indicate grandmaster status or another high rank, however. Then you go on the second side. Other forms of martial arts use the red belt to indicate pre-black belt rank or even denotate a beginner who holds no rank. So if you see this and the semicolon rule works, you do not want to keep or like that 2 comma transition rule. One of the big red flags, and this is where it becomes an exception, is when the sentence is crazy long, and we know we always test the semicolon first. If you look up, and like I said, some like they do love commas with transition words, but if you look up at like however from a hacky level, they don't even test the semicolon, and also it's a shorter sentence. And then if you look up from the transition word in contrast on number 2, it's a shorter sentence. Yes, they are testing the semicolon, but we read out loud that that's really awkward. So yes, you can keep the transition words in mind as a hack, but if you are testing your strongest punctuation, like your semicolon period, you're going to swim out, like, I don't know, swim out of jail, help improve your score, and cost us elimination from there. Okay, 2 ACT questions. These are from the June release test from a high level. I can use these. I'm an ACT affiliate, which means I do not work for the ACT, but we pay fees to be able to be more connected with the ACT, but also more importantly, use the resources. This is actually from my test. I took the June test. I did take the July, but I'm going to take the September. Okay, so that being said, let's look at number 1. So as a teacher, I see pressure students face to perform in school and prepare for life outside of the classroom. So on number 1, I'm looking here first, and I am not seeing what I call my strong punctuation. So we don't have automatically like a semicolon or a period to test. Rule of thumb, if you're ever in doubt, please just choose less commas. Because if we just look at option D, this is how it would read out loud. I see the pressure students face to perform in school and to prepare for, like, I know it's obnoxious, but it's true. So you would eliminate D. The other reason you would eliminate D is there's just too many 2 commas there. But outside of 7,000 commas, let's just go ahead and eliminate that for good measure. So I see pressure student face to perform in school and to prepare for life outside of the classroom. So the first one we're going to test is a more reasonable one. And if you don't know where to start, I just tend to test no change. So on no change, you've got a comma here and you've got a comma there. And then we're going to cross it out and we're going to do our little test and read it out loud. As a teacher, for life outside the classroom, I can't even read that closely. That's not a sentence. You cannot remove all that information. That would be considered essential. So let's go ahead and test B. As a teacher, I see the pressure students face to perform in school and prepare for life outside of the classroom. You really don't need a comma anywhere else except in that little intro, and this answer is going to be B. One thing to also keep in mind with this, and a big red flag, is whenever you see comma and I meant to mention this earlier, is that's also going to equal a period or a semicolon. And on test day, I actually do remember now testing that first, but just from a high level of how to look at it. There's multiple ways to approach these problems, but as long as we find the right answer, then we're good. Okay, last one from the July test, the June test. So on number 19, we are going to follow our rule and test the strongest punctuation first. So on number 19, and we don't really have to understand what's going on in the passage, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. You do with some of the questions, but not these. So when we first look at this and we want to go with our rule of testing the strongest punctuation, we are going to test B because our semicolon, and then we are going to draw it in, especially if we're doing this on paper. So ancient Icelandic legal texts defined V as currency equivalent to 1 ounce of silver. That one, it does kind of start out as a sentence, like the left side is. But then if you look at the right side, the standard currency among Viking communities. We can't, that is not an independent clause or standalone sentence on the right-hand side. And at the same time with number 19, I forgot to read in which was the standard currency among Viking communities. Because of the which and the word choice, it still falls under the same thing. Like that cannot be an independent clause. So we eliminate B. And this was one of our rules earlier that most of the time, semicolons and which are just not friends. Okay, and then let's look through these other ones. So let's erase here. So now we're starting to look. I would look first on this one because I see a dash, and I would see if there's any other dashes. There's not. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's a single dash. Okay, let's look at the other ones for non-essential clauses. So if we have comma here, the ancient Icelandic legal text defined a V as a currency equivalent to 1 ounce of silver, the standard currency among Viking communities. But here's the kicker. What they're actually adding in is it was. And when you're doing that, you are connecting two independent clauses with a comma, which is also a big no-no. So when you add like it in there, that's going to make it two independent clauses, and we are going to scratch through C. And then we've got to 1 ounce of silver being the standard currency among Viking communities, or we've got the dash. Ancient Icelandic legal text defined a V as a currency equivalent to 1 ounce of silver. What is giving this away, and a lot of students probably didn't choose A on the test because they haven't looked over dashes, and I do plan to make a more robust video on single dashes especially, is this acts as an explainer. And so on here, it is explaining it really well. So you want to lean towards that single dash. So if you found this video helpful, please let me know in the comments. I do plan to explain a little bit more on dashes and colons and all that stuff. I hold the disclaimer, my background is not in ACT, and not in English, and my degree is in science. But the unique thing with the ACT English is it's a very hackable test. And I highlight that my degree is not in English, but I've coached kids to very, very high scores on the ACT English because we're able to reteach it in just more tangible way. So if you want more support, I'm going to link our $99 ACT class below. And that has actually a lot of ACT English. We've had insane results, including one kid who messaged me the other day. They jumped 11 dang points in English, which is mind-boggling, and I'm really excited for them. There is a ton in there. There's more practice materials, so I'm going to link it below. It's affordable. Would love to see you around, but regardless, let me know in the comments if you have any questions or even just video ideas.